Hello, everybody who's on the line here. Welcome to the BJA-sponsored webinar on applications of problem-oriented policing and the SARA problem-solving model in smart policing initiatives. Mike Scott from the Pop Center could not be on the call today, but I just want everybody to know that he has been working with us on this webinar, and he has been a supporter and a valuable colleague since the inception of smart policing, since 2009. And those of you who are involved in smart policing or who have been paying attention to what's going on in smart policing know that problem-oriented policing and the SARA model play an extremely important role in smart policing initiatives around the country. And this will become even more evident as you listen to the presentations today. We have several information-packed presentations to get through in this webinar, so just permit me just a few more words about process and logistics, and we'll get on to the site presentations. Today we're going to hear from 4 smart policing initiative sites. Lowell, Massachusetts, with Deputy Chief Arthur Ryan Jr. and Brenda Bond. Palm Beach County with Detective Rolando Silva and Deborah Einbinder from Lynn University. Glendale, Arizona, Mark Carpenter from the Glendale Police Department and Mike White from Arizona State University. Boston, Massachusetts, we have investigators Bruce Holloway and Desiree DeSalt, and I know Maria Cheever's here too. Welcome, you guys. Each pair will present for about 10 to 15 minutes. And since we have limited time here today, we're going to ask that webinar participants, if you have comments or questions, use the chat facility that we have on the right-hand side of your screen if you have the screen up. And if you're going to make a comment, just be sure, if you're going to make a comment to everybody, that it says chat to all, or if you want to direct a comment to somebody, you can select them from the menu above and then just send your comment to them. And then if we have time towards the end, if there's still time, we'll talk about some of the comments that have come up in the chat room during the presentations, but it's entirely possible that we'll get through these 4 presentations and not have a lot of time. So if that's the case, we will review all the comments and questions in the chat room and respond to everybody in the days that follow. Please remember that this webinar is recorded and that it will be broadcast on the Smart Policing website in the future. So what you say and what you write in the chat room will likely be retained for the future. Also, please note that we have an upcoming webinar in November on how to be a smart policing officer. And then we have others planned for the near future, so just please look out for those notices. Finally, I just want to note my thanks to Bureau of Justice Assistance for their strong support for the Smart Policing Initiative, to the staff at CNA, Vivian and others who coordinate these webinars, do all the background work, and of course, thanks to all of you for your interest and participation. As always, there will be a link to an evaluation following this webinar, and we ask that you please pay attention to it and send us your honest opinions. With that, Vivian, unless there's anything else I need to say, I'd like to turn this over to the team from Lowell and get us started. Okay.
I think we can get started.
Arthur, you're on.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. We could start with the first slide if you'd like. Just for those of you who aren't familiar with Lowell, Massachusetts, Lowell is a city about 25 miles north of Boston, New Hampshire. It's the 4th largest city in the state, comprises a population of between 105 to 120,000 persons, and is about 14 square miles. The focus of our SPI initiative was to try to combat, property crime in the city. We would notice through our CompStat process that the property crime revolving in and about, specifically house breaks, for example, car breaks, all sorts and types of larceny, including robberies, were really, citywide an issue. Looking at that, we also noticed through the CompStat process that anecdotally we suspected that a lot of those crimes were being committed by individuals who were addicted to drugs and were supplying their drug habit, if you will, financing their drug habit by basically stealing. So that was the problem we identified. And interestingly enough, we also determined through the CompStat process that many individuals that were getting arrested for these crimes were in fact addicted to drugs, yet we were not making a lot of street-level drug arrests. So what we did afterwards, if you could change the slide, please, is we started to analyze the problem. And our analysis basically focused on 3 different strategies. The first of these strategies was a place-based strategy. The place-based strategy was based on the hotspot study that Dr. Brager and Dr. Bond conducted in the city of Lowell back around 2005. We basically looked at the areas in the city that had a large proportion, or a dense proportion, if you will, of incidents involving house breaks, car breaks, and those larcenies I had spoke about earlier. We collected qualitative data from the sector captains and officers, and a lot of anecdotal information as well from those on the street, detectives, and everything else, to determine where we should concentrate strategies based on place. A second strategy we looked at was focusing on offenders, and basically an offender-based strategy looking at those individuals who we suspected were highly involved in this criminal activity as a result of drug addiction. That became a little more difficult for us to analyze, and what we did is we looked at the drug arrests, and quite frankly we were very successful at going after mid-level dealers and upper-level dealers through our partners with the federal government and state agencies, and we were not having as much success on the streets dealing with that street-level user and, quite frankly, the individuals that we were concerned about. So we had to look at a different way of approaching that analysis, and one of the team members came up with an idea of looking at the overdoses that we had in the city. And after a study of those overdoses, basically we, by doing background investigations on the individuals that had overdosed, after that study we were able to tie in the activity or behavior, that criminal behavior, with the fact that they were being, a lot of that was being perpetrated by drug users. Next slide, please. So after we had analyzed the problem and determined that we were going to target, places where a lot of this drug activity was occurring, but also offenders that were involved in this activity, we looked at it as 2 approaches. The offender-based was a citywide approach. And the place-based was, in fact, more specific to different neighborhoods. They both were conducted coinciding with each other, but not necessarily always overlapping. For the place-based strategies, we selected 12 hotspots for intervention and 12 comparison spots. We identified the nature and characteristics of crime that occurred in hotspot locations or hotspot locations, and we tried to identify strategies that we thought might be successful in addressing those issues. The strategies that we deployed in the place base were, for the most part, additional patrols or concentrated patrols, directed patrols, things of that nature. So we targeted those areas by taking the area cruiser that would normally have responsibility for targeted areas, as well as responsibility for less active area, and concentrated their patrol time in the targeted areas. In addition, we emphasized some additional patrol units from the Traffic Bureau, our Community Response Unit, and the like, to address issues in those targeted areas. We also had 12 comparison spots, and those particular control areas were unknown to the practitioners, being the police officers from actually my office on down, and were held in strict confidence by the Crime Analysis Unit, as well as Mary Ann Bellata were to identify a group of individuals that were kind of the frequent flyers, if you will. The frequent flyers being those individuals that we suspected were heavily involved and actively involved in committing property crimes as a result of their addiction. What we looked at is to kind of reach them. We actually interviewed many of them, sent detectives and officers, found them, spoke to them, tried to let them know that we were aware of the activity and that we were going to basically keep an eye on them, but at the same time offered them services through a local entity called Lowell that basically provides services for drug addicted individuals, and we had partnered up with them for this purpose, which was kind of an interesting relationship that hadn't occurred previously. One of the interesting things we noted is that many times when we sent people to do the home visits, we found that the individuals weren't around, but family members were. We initially figured that the family members would be reluctant to cooperate with us or speak to us about their loved one's addiction, but in fact we found that it was opposite. That was not the case. That the family members were very eager to talk to us and in fact cooperated with us quite a bit, recognizing that finally something was going to be to try to at least intervene in the individual that they cared about, recognizing that they were probably, in most cases, the first victims of these individuals and cared deeply about their future, and in some cases even felt they'd be better off if they were incarcerated than on the streets where they could succumb to an overdose or something like that. We also identified different other strategies. We elicited a partnership with the district attorney's office, the local sheriff's office, the probation, parole, and we began to conduct meetings on a monthly basis with those partners to discuss these individuals and keep updated on their progress or at least their status. In addition to that, we started to engage in a department-wide initiative where these individuals were known to every individual in the department, and through technology by way of the dashboard that we use in the cruiser for the computer system that is shared throughout the department, both in the office area, the desk, tablets, police cars, etc., that the individuals would be very easily accessible from that place, and we use like a blog type of situation where those individuals could be kept track of. If somebody would see them on the street, they can make notes of them. These things are still ongoing, and we're still refining them. Our third strategy, which I think is probably the most significant strategy, is the organizational change strategy. From the onset, we decided that this SPI initiative was going to be more than simply an initiative, but it was going to be a kind of a paradigm shift, if you will, in the way we conduct our business. We're very invested in community policing and problem-oriented policing, and we wanted to turn around and find a way to take and utilize our technology and our smart policing concepts and dovetail those into what has proven to us to be successful in the past, to kind of come up with a whole new way of doing things and setting priorities. So in order to do that, we did identify different system changes needed to take place. We altered the way we do our ComStat meeting to really reflect the problem solving and data gathering that we were trying to conduct. We conducted roll call meetings. We actually went to numerous roll calls trying to explain to the frontline officers what it is that we were trying to accomplish and what have you. We also designed a focus group that is made up of several officers and supervisors, as well as
Thank you, Deputy. Just very quickly, we organized our measurement around at least the two are just listed here, but I'll also comment on the organizational piece because they're really embedded in each of these. But once we identified where the places were that we would focus our efforts, we matched those up with comparison spots, much like the intervention locations. We didn't do a randomized process because we had some concerns from the captains and some others about what that would mean, at least if there would be some question or perception of sort of the quality of intervention. So what we basically did, as the deputy mentioned, was that we selected other areas in the city that pretty much reflected the hotspots that we're focused on. But we're working closely. I'm working very closely with staff from the Crime Analysis Unit and from the Research and Development Office around the process and outcomes for the entire SPI initiative. That's important because we feel like we're working on building capacity of the folks that work in these positions to engage in this kind of analysis on a regular basis. And because we had worked with them on this hotspot study with Dr. Braga previously, everybody was really comfortable with that. So for place-based, we're measuring we looked at the property crime data before we started the intervention, and we've been watching it ongoing, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But then we'll look at that at the end of the intervention as well. We're tracking things like the characteristics. We're using photos and things like that. We've created profiles for each of the hotspots. In terms of the process data that we're including, it's bi-weekly surveys. So what we've done is created a web-based survey for the sector captains and for the lieutenant in charge of the criminal bureau who oversees the offender-based strategy. And every 2 weeks they complete a survey about the kind of interventions that were applied either to the offenders or in each of the hotspots. So we've been collecting this data every 2 weeks for the last year. In terms of other process sources, data sources, we are using our steering committee meetings to collect information about what kind of interventions that are being applied to each of the areas. We're also capturing a lot of really great data on the challenges, and that's where sort of the organizational piece overlaps. We're trying to track what are the kinds of things that seem to be getting in the way of trying different kinds of strategies, or what are the factors that are influencing the application of some strategies versus others. And so we find that to be very, very important to the lesson that we're learning. And then lastly, we're also conducting interviews with key folks from the field, from the sectors, from the administration, from the criminal investigation division where the offender piece is based. And so we're getting a lot of really great qualitative data there. In terms of offender-based measurements, what we're doing is we are looking at a group of individuals who are on a targeted offender list, and we conducted a check on their criminal history to just get a sense of who they were and what criteria they would meet for this targeted offender strategy. And then we are tracking any kind of interactions that they have with the police to provide us with some sense of what exactly are they receiving. Do they have a home visit? Are they getting any kind of treatment? How often do they interact with the police, and different kinds of things. So what we're trying to do is sort of capture the quote-unquote intervention, and we can't get specific name information from our substance abuse provider partner, but what they can tell us is how many people have been referred to their program from our program. So those are sort of the general offender-based process information that we're collecting right now. What we'll also do is we will conduct a post-intervention assessment of their criminal history, so any kind of official interaction that they've had with the police, whether it's rearrest or reincarceration, we'll collect that information as well. So those are the general measurement strategies that we're using to find out what what it is about the SPI that might be working and some of the challenges and things like that. One thing that we talked about recently that we thought was an interesting question that we haven't been able to answer is whether or not there's a relationship between the offenders and the place. And we haven't been able to support that through any kind of data, but we feel like a lot of the folks that are on the offender list certainly either live in or spend time in or have relationships with people in some of these hotspot locations. So that's one thing that I think we'll continue to have a conversation about. Next slide. So this has been a very interesting conversation in the city of Lowell, where we found that some of our treatment locations have seen positive results. So we have 12 treatment locations, and we have seen in 7 of those hotspots, we've seen decreases in property crimes when we compare over this period of time. But we've seen increases in some of those locations as well. What we also have been talking about is that also in some of our control areas, we are seeing similar kinds of patterns. So much to the dismay of a lot of folks, we spent most of the summer having a conversation about what this means. And we're still trying to work out what we feel like is a really good explanation, but we certainly feel like the start is the fact that the City of Lowell and the Lowell Police Department has really adopted this problem-solving approach to crime and disorder for almost 7 years now. And so despite the fact that we are focused on 12 specific hotspot areas, what we're finding is that they're applying a lot of the same kind of problem-solving strategies regardless of where the problems are located. So that's something we're trying to work on right now. But as you'll see, we have certainly seen a lot of positive change in our hotspot areas. And the data that we're collecting about the interventions will tell us some interesting things about what it is that they're doing. Next slide. So this slide just really summarizes a lot of the different kinds of things that we're seeing in terms of the lessons and what what's happening in the place-based and just my last comment, I wanted to talk about the offender-based strategy. This was, I think, probably one of the most challenging pieces of the Lowell SPI because, again, Lowell's been working on this problem-solving place-based approach for a long time, but in terms of focusing on the offender basis, the deputy said there were some real changes in the way we were asking investigators to operate, which included home visits and being much more proactive and partnering with treatment providers and in a much more formal way. So this is something that we feel like we're learning a lot about that really falls into this organizational change piece. So again, this slide just summarizes a lot of the lessons learned, and we feel like it's really making a difference in Lowell. So, and I think that's it for us.
We have Palm Beach up next, yes?
Yes. Are we ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, again, hi, I'm Rolando Silva, and I have Dr. Deborah Ander with me. And our Smart Policing Initiative in Palm Beach County is all about problem solving using the core principles of community policing to try to assail a very difficult problem, the victimization of immigrants in our community. The reason this problem is difficult, and I think it's one that is experienced in many of our nation's cities, is because the victims themselves are often unwilling to report crimes or cooperate with law enforcement due to their immigration status. And the suspects who prey on these victims know it too. Next slide. That's a brief overview of our SPI. I kind of already paraphrased what it's about. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right, in scanning, our city in Lake Worth has about 35,000 residents, and about half of them, I think over 40%, are Hispanic or Latinos from Central South America. And most of them are migrant workers and their families who have entered this country for the most part illegally. The Palm Beach Sheriff's Office took over all law enforcement functions in 2008 for the city, and it was then that we discovered the problem. There was a dramatic increase in the robbery of migrant workers, and as we looked at the historical data, we saw that this problem has been occurring for some time. Moreover, we learned that the victims were engaging in risky behavior that contributed to the problem. Next, please. As we analyzed the problem in more detail, we learned a significant amount of the robberies were occurring to the migrant workers in a kind of a concentrated area. Also learned that a lot of the suspects in these cases were coming in from outside our city to prey on this community. Next slide, please. With this understanding, we embarked on a problem-oriented policing approach, again, using the core principles of community policing, which included community partnerships, outreach initiatives, proactive and strategic law enforcement operations. The three main components of our strategic response is, one, the hiring of a civilian community outreach liaison, two, the reassigning of a dedicated robbery detective who exclusively investigates these type of crimes, and three, initiating a number of significant outreach initiatives to build trust with this community and try to teach them how to prevent their victimization. Next slide. Our community liaison, who serves as the intermediary between law enforcement and the immigrant community. We are very fortunate in our project to find a uniquely qualified community liaison who is Guatemalan born. He's a naturalized citizen who has a graduate degree in criminal justice. He speaks very fluent English, Spanish, and the Mayan language conjugal. His central goal is to build a bridge between PBSO and the migrant community by engaging residents and law enforcement in positive outreach events. He also collaborates extensively with the line and leadership levels of the PBSO and multiple community-based organizations. Our dedicated robbery detective investigates all the robberies in the targeted community and works closely with the community liaison, conducting proactive patrols and monitoring known offenders and ex-offenders. Some examples of the outreach initiatives that are done. We had a month-long soccer tournament that was very successful. It occurred on weekend nights. We've had several town hall meetings to address issues raised by the community. We put out strategic advertisements on bus benches to inform the community of the liaison and the different things we're working on, radio advertisements, and we're currently working on public service announcement that will be aired on television. A couple more things. They've set up an office at a popular check cashing store where the community liaison is able to meet residents every weekend. Next slide, please. The response, and basically our plan has been in place since May of 2010 and has been consistent since its inception. The SPI team meets regularly to evaluate the plan's effectiveness based on the data we receive from our surveys and the crime stats. One of the keys to the program is having a very competent research partner whose job is to analyze the data that comes in and advise on the research findings and to help direct the team in the way it should go. And I'll let her go ahead and proceed with the next slide and talk about the assessment.
Thank you, Captain. This is Deborah Ainbinder from Lynn University. A couple of things in terms of what we've been doing. This project is a quasi-experimental design which consists of both an experimental group and a control group. In our case, our experimental group comes from what we call District 14 in the Lake Worth area in Palm Beach County. Our comparison group is in District 1, which is on the outskirts of Lake Worth. They were selected for this based on their similarity in population size and issues related to robberies. So we had, as the captain mentioned, basically we had primary outcomes that we were looking for. One, we were looking for a reduction in robberies, and then also an improvement in the attitudes of this population towards the police. So this population does present some challenges, and that is what the captain first started to discuss. One is that it's a migrant population, which means it's quite mobile. It goes where the population goes where there is work to go. So there's difficulty in getting some permanent residents, and also many may move out of our area and then come back at different times. This transient nature does give us some cause for concern in terms of research, certainly, and in terms of data collection. The second is that this community, we have communication issues because basically there's cultural and language barriers. As the captain mentioned, there's 23 different dialects that are spoken in the Guatemalan area, so many of them are spoken here in a variety of different manners. Many speak Spanish, but not all speak Spanish, and many are highly illiterate, which also does bring us some challenges in both PBSO working with this population and us from a research point of view. One of the other challenges is that the community comes to the United States and to Palm Beach County with some preconceived notions of law enforcement. Those preconceived notions include the idea of negative interactions, negative aspects of law enforcement. So to move those attitudes, we're really working from a deficit before we even started. And then in addition, the point that the captain made is that most are here illegally, which causes a great deal of fear in terms of deportation, also in terms of even reporting or speaking to anyone in law enforcement. And because of this, they are willing to even be victims and not report their crime or do anything related to that. But with that all being said, we do a great deal of work. We do document all of the process through working through qualitative interviews, logs, minutes, evaluating everything that is done at any site, at any intervention. We also do a variety of different types of community surveys, which include looking at data that looks at the community satisfaction. If we can move to the next slide. I'm sorry, thank you. This just gives you an idea of where the control and experimental areas are. The experimental area is on your right if you're looking at the slide, and the control is on your left. Can we move to the next slide? Okay, so this is just a chart through December of 11, so it starts prior to us getting the grant and through the end of 2011. And it just is a look at the actual situation with robberies. Now, all these robberies, we're talking about robberies to a person, and we are talking about robberies within our grant area, so it's actually has to be coded for the grant. So within that, we definitely saw a reduction in robberies from intervention before we actually started. Then there was a basic little spike in reporting, which is something that we had anticipated, and then we had a lowering of robberies. The issue is we were down to an average of 7.3 monthly robberies, and we have maintained that for the next 6 months in our evaluation in 2012. In terms of our community satisfaction, we have continued to have positive results towards the law enforcement, and actually our last data, which was from, as the captain mentioned, our soccer tournament, which was an enhanced intervention. So we made the strength of intervention based on our results. We made that stronger, and because of that, that intervention actually came out with showing a very, very strong inclination towards law enforcement, and that was a change from our last soccer event and our 2011, all our events together compared. In addition, we did in the soccer event, we compared the control with the experimental and found a significant difference there on many areas in terms of being more comfortable reporting to law enforcement, talking to law enforcement, and believing that law enforcement, specifically the Sheriff's Office, was a good resource. The one other thing that I just want to say as a researcher in terms of this initiative is that one thing specific to being a smart policing initiative is that throughout, all recommendations are constantly given from research as to what things might need to be enhanced, what things might need to be changed based on evidence at each meeting. I'm included, in every meeting, but that our data and information is included in every meeting as well and considered as a team. And I'm going to move over to the captain to complete our presentation.
Okay, last slide. Some of the challenges that we've experienced in dealing with this initiative. We had ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, come through, do a sweep without really letting us know, and that kind of undermined our efforts, obviously. And the way we kind of overcome that is by when the residents, the immigrant community, meets with us at these town hall forums, we talk to them and let them know that they're an independent law enforcement agency and they're going to do what they have to do, but at the end of the day, that's not our focus, and we're going to continue to work with them to help prevent their victimization. Another thing, we're going to, like the doctor said, we're going to have to constantly keep looking at and evaluating the different strategies that we employ. We have like one issue that's come up in the last 4 weeks where there's an individual out here dressing like a police officer with a police radio, a gun, a badge, and he's robbing these immigrants at their home every Friday night. So we've been out there in undercover operations trying to catch this guy, but we have yet to catch him. Obviously, that doesn't send a very good message to the community. So those are the things that we're going to have to keep working on. And at this point, I think we'll go ahead and conclude the presentation and entertain any questions later when they come up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you both very much. Mike and Mark, you ready?
Hi, this is Mike White from Arizona State University. Can you hear me, Chip?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. And we have Lieutenant Mark Carpenter from the Glendale Police Department here as well. The Glendale Police Department was one of the 10 originally funded SPI sites. So they've been at this for a while. That initial project provided an important foundation for the work that we're going to talk about today. So we can move to the next slide. The goal of the Glendale SPI, what we call Glendale SPI Part 2, is in a lot of ways it represents going to scale in the police department. The original project dealt with just 2 units in one division. This project is multiple units across both divisions in Glendale. In terms of the crime issues being addressed, this time around the focus is on 2 issues. One, what we're calling prolific or repeat offenders, and the second is organized retail theft. And the Glendale SPI is quintessential problem-oriented policing. It's we take the SARA model, and that's the framework that we use for the entire project. So in terms of the objectives, the project began with some advanced classroom-based training on problem-oriented policing, and we begin the SARA model in that training with the scanning of problems, and then the idea is basically over the 2-year project, the officers go through all of those SARA steps, the scanning, the analysis, the response, and then the assessment. Next slide, please. In terms of the training, like I said, it's classroom-based. It's about 20 hours of training, and we had anywhere from 20 to 30 officers in the training. The training is grounded in 2 things. The first is the model curriculum that's provided by the Center for Problem-Oriented Policing, which is accessible on their website. The second thing we did for the training is that we included several of the SPI webinars that are available on the SPI website. For example, we had the officers watch the problem-oriented policing webinar led by Mike Scott. Scott Decker has a webinar that he led on targeting offenders, and we incorporated those into the training as well. Like I said, the purpose of the training was to start the SARA process. So essentially we said to the officers, identify the problems that you want to work on over the next 2 years. And we give them homework assignments that they complete, which involves basic scanning steps like analyzing calls for service. Some of the officers conducted set assessments of what they considered to be problem areas. They talked among their colleagues, other officers in the department, and we had lots of good dialogue between the officers in the actual training. So at the end of the day, the training went on for about 4 months, and you can see the different divisions, the Foothills Division that Lieutenant Carpenter works in the Gateway Division, and the officers in each of those divisions identified 2 specific problems that they wanted to address in the SPI. And again, both were related to those There's general crime issues of organized retail theft and repeat prolific offenders, and we'll get into each of those problems in a little more detail now. Next slide. The analysis, I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Carpenter, and he'll talk about what's been going on in the Foothills Division, and then I'll represent the Gateway Division for those officers. So, Mark, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Dr. White. The first thing dealing with our shopping mall issue is it's a very large mall. It's 175 stores encompassing 1.2 million square feet. It's on multi-levels, so there's lots of opportunities for criminals to go in, commit crime, and go undetected. And to make that situation worse, what we found out in the analysis section is that the stores were not communicating with each other, and they also were not communicating with the mall security. So one of the things that we started, and we'll get to the next slide, but that you'll see is that we started a security summit to try to open that dialogue, and that also enhanced getting more information as to what the problem was. The second part of the Foothills Division project is an apartment complex. It's about 700 units, and what we did there is look for calls for service, specifically looking at property crimes, person crimes, and drug offenses, and doing resident surveys, and that's what we're finishing up right now.
So, with the one other quick point on the Foothills projects, the resident survey, as Lieutenant Carpenter mentioned, there are close to 800 units in that complex, and we have a team of undergraduate ASU students that have been basically knocking on doors for several weeks, attempting to get residents to complete this survey that captures information regarding their perceptions of crime and disorder, perceptions of the police, and that's going to really provide a foundation for the responses that will be developed, talking to the people who live there and asking them what they believe the problems to be. With the Gateway Division, the first project, as I mentioned, is a mall, and it's a little bit different from the mall being targeted in Foothills because it's not yet completed. This will be a very large outlet mall. It's going to be right next to the Phoenix Cardinals football stadium, 85 stores, a lot of high-end stores. The first thing we wanted to do is to figure out what to expect when this mall opens up in terms of crime and disorder. This, until recently, was a dirt field. Obviously, there weren't a whole lot of calls for service being generated when it was a dirt field. So we wanted to figure out what would be kind of the going rate to expect in terms of calls for service. So we began reaching out to police departments in the Phoenix area as well as several other states that had this experience where you had virtually nothing there before in a location and then a large outlet mall that opens up. And based on those analyses that we conducted and the people that we contacted, the going rate that we're anticipating is that the police department should expect anywhere from 130 to 150 additional calls for service per month at this location. The other thing, the leadership, the corporation that's opening this mall is called Tanger Outlets. So we've been meeting with corporate leadership really for several months now, and the mall is set to open November 15th, which is the week before Thanksgiving and the week before Black Friday, which obviously is a big retail day. And we've been meeting with the leadership of this mall really for going back 6 months prior to opening. So, the police department's been involved in discussions on the site plan, talking about parking, talking about security, talking about SEPTED issues. We've also developed a memorandum of understanding between Tanger, the police department, and ASU that's going to govern the partnership and the sharing of information. So what we're trying to do is really lay an important groundwork and build a partnership and open lines of communication well before the mall even opens. With regard to the second project, which is the Prolific Offenders Project, again, the idea here is to target serious repeat offenders in a relatively small target area. The first thing we did is we talked about what the definition should be, and we came up with A prolific offender is someone who has had 3 or more what we're calling benchmark contacts. A benchmark contact is an arrest, being identified as a suspect, or a field interrogation. So having 3 or more of those types of contacts within the last 3 years that involve specific types of crimes, and those crimes are aggravated assault, robbery, and burglary. So we developed that definition, those criteria, and we sent that to the crime analyst in Glendale and asked him to produce a list of all the offenders that meet that criteria that live or have had one of those contacts in the specific target area that we're looking at. So if we go to the next slide.
The Foothills Division under planned responses, and the reason why they're planned is because we're just now starting to go into the response phase, and that was a major issue with our guys. They're traditionally hard chargers, so they want to jump right into the project, and kind of waiting for some of that analysis to be done was a definite challenge. But on the shopping mall, opening up the communication lines has been one of our goals, and by doing that, we're able to get more information, and specifically related to organized retail crime. Last week we had what we call a crime summit, where we invite every store in the mall and have them listen to some topic that's of importance. Specifically, last week we had the Organized Retail Crime Association and the Arizona Retailers Association present a little bit on what the impact is on communication, and that was a real asset. Then we also got the county attorney and the city prosecutor on board, so that we will have enhanced prosecution once we start our enforcement. Under the apartment complex, the goal is to reduce disorder, and we're going to do that by specifically responding to individuals that are causing the problems. We got management on board right away, and I can say that they've been quick to respond to any issues by evicting their problems.
With the 2 projects in the Gateway Division, a lot of the same challenges are emerging with the outlet mall as we're seeing with the shopping mall. It's not easy, and oftentimes getting these stores and the managers to talk to each other, because they view each other as competition. So there's lots of good reasons from their perspective not to communicate, with the store that's down the hallway or around the corner. So that's been a bit of a challenge, and specifically with the mall, what we're trying to do is a lot of the stores have different perspectives on how to respond to crime, and these are often come down from the corporation to the local stores. So what we want to do is begin meeting with the individual stores and almost develop store-specific responses. What do they want from the police department when a crime occurs, when a theft occurs in their store? And just like the other mall, the idea really is that we want to open up the lines of communication, because it's clear from the experiences at the Foothills Mall that these individual stores and the security at the mall and some of the stores have their own security. They have really important information that they tend not to share with the other stores. So the idea is open the lines of communication and get them to see each other as partners in at least this specific aspect of what they do. With the prolific offenders, once we get back that list from the crime analyst of the individuals in the target area that meet our definition, we hope that list will be around 50 to 75 individuals. We won't know for sure until we get the list. We're going to conduct some social network analysis to explore the degree of connectedness among these individuals in this fairly dense area, and then based on the results of that analysis, develop some targeted crime control responses for specific individuals who just flat out need to be arrested. There are other individuals that will be targeted for call-ins and delivering that deterrent message. and other individuals may be more appropriate for approaching and developing as confidential informants. So those are the types of responses that we're going to implement once that analysis is done. And as Lieutenant Carpenter said, we're about a year into the project. We're almost done with the analysis of all these 4 different problems. So response is really the next phase. Next slide, please. Just real quickly, I'll run through our planned assessment for each of these problems, and then I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Carpenter to wind up on the presentation. The 2 shopping malls, obviously what we're going to be looking at is reducing calls for service, and particularly with regard to theft and organized retail theft. With the shopping mall, we're asking all of the stores and mall security to use a uniform reporting mechanism that has very, very specific locations of crimes. You see the term heat map there. What we'd like to do is for a period of, say, 60 days, have everyone at the mall use our form and have these specific locations so that we can look at the footprint of the mall itself and produce very, very specific locations where crime seems to be concentrated. And then that obviously has important implications for mall security. The mall has a fairly advanced camera system that can be moved around, and then also for law enforcement responses. With the apartment complex in Foothills, the focus targeting on those individuals that are creating real problems at the complex, reducing crime and disorder generally, and then obviously with the survey, we're going to go back probably about this time next year and conduct those resident surveys again. Outlet Mall under construction, I've talked about some of these things already. With the prolific offenders, the use of this social network analysis for driving police responses, I think, is going to be pretty neat and interesting, looking at previously unknown connections between individuals. There's also a decent chance that the list that will be produced will be too long for the police to target everyone. So, for example, if there's 150 people on the list that meet our definition, it presents the opportunity to do kind of a comparison or a control group where we match individuals, those who were targeted as a result of the analysis and those who would have been targeted if we had more resources, but we couldn't, and then just look at the outcomes there. So next slide, and Lieutenant Carpenter will wrap up the presentation.
Okay, so our progress to date, as we mentioned, we're almost complete with our analysis. I know 2 of our response plans should start next week. Challenges, we had some internal challenges. We had a death of a little girl actually a year ago, and we've been working a landfill dig trying to recover the remains of the victim. So that took a lot of personnel away from what we had originally planned to be available. And we're also addressing a situation with an interim chief, and we were really slow on promotions and supervisors. I came into this project late, which was actually a benefit for me because the research partners had already trained my guys. When I say guys, I mean girls too. But they were already up on board as far as what we needed to do. They had picked out the projects, and the hardest part for me, as I already mentioned, was holding them back so that we're make sure that everything is complete as we go. One of the other things that was important to note was they had identified another project area during the analysis. They found out that that area was not as bad as what it was perceived to be. So it kind of shows to light how important that analysis really is on delineating what the problem may be. And then finally, I do have to say that we are truly living a bottom-driven, line-level, doing most of the work on this. And as a manager, I think sometimes we get caught up in that kind of thing. But so far, it has been very beneficial just to stand back and let the employees do what they want to do because they're right on task. And with that, unless Dr. White has something to add, I think we're complete.
No, I think we're done.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's move on to Boston.
Hi, this is Maria Chevers. I'm the Director of Research and Development, and I have with me here Superintendent Bruce Holloway, who's the Commander of the Bureau of Investigative Services in Boston. I'm going to have him begin the presentation. If you could move on to the next slide, please.
Good afternoon. So Boston Smart Policing Initiative is different from other smart policing initiatives as it is simultaneously a research model and an organizational change effort focused on improving investigative protocols and response from call to service through forensic group responses to homicides. The idea for this examination was prompted by the City of Boston's homicide clearance rates and that they have been lower than the national average of 60% for some time. Recognizing this persistent problem as identified by the chart you see there, 2000-2011 numbers, the Boston Police Department has taken on the challenge to test whether adopting better developed investigative processes and accountability structures will improve homicide clearance rates. In this process, we followed fundamentals of the SARA model.
Can you move on to slide 2, please?
So while acknowledging that the low number of homicides cleared in the city, the BPD utilized both best practice research and analytical resources to help us further define our obstacles and their factors as compared to other police departments with significantly higher clearance rates. In addition, the BPD is fortunate to have a long-standing research relationship with Dr. Anthony Braga, whose work with the BPD has focused on fatal and non-fatal shootings, hotspots and gangs, amongst other topics. Dr. Braga's scanning and research were critical to helping us determine the scope of our project and focus in on our goals. Dr. Braga also reviewed scientific literature on homicide clearance rates and Boston-specific crime data. The BPD Smart Policing Project Coordinator also looked at best practices in departments in both the U.S. and the United Kingdom based on their clearance rates. You should note that we sent 2 deputies to the U.K. For several months to the Senior Investigator Officer training, and that was very helpful to this project. Comparing clearance rates and other practices, Commissioner Davis concluded that a more standard and uniform process of homicide response and investigations is necessary in Boston. Now I'll have Maria Chivas, Director of Research and Development, speak with you about our analysis and response phase.
Can you move on to slides 3 and 4? Right during this section, I'll talk a little bit about analysis and then response. The analysis and response phases of the project have and will have been fluid as we move forward in our project from phase 1, which is a retrospective look at correlating factors of cleared cases versus non-clear homicide cases in Boston from 2007 through 2011. Phase 1 is not complete yet in terms of the research piece. We'll talk a little bit about that a little later on. Phase 2 of the research piece will take place after phase 1 is done, and that at that point we will identify and examine how our new strategies that we will be implementing are working out. We will examine gaps, opportunities, and learnings presented through the use of these new standards, policies, and protocols. And then finally, in phase 3, we will examine if what we did worked, and if so, in what ways, toward the overall goal of increasing clearance rates. So as I speak to this, we've had quite some time in the first, I'd say, almost 12 months in the project to really take the research time to do the retrospective. And out of that, there were 314 cases that are being looked at. Of this, at this point, only 52% of those cases, which is 163 cases, have we had not only involved the collection of the coding of those, but in that we looked at homicide motives, victim-offender relationships, weapons used, victim-offender characteristics, for all 314. And then as a second piece of this, we're now coding those investigations for actions, and only 52% of those were completed. With this, we have a preliminary analysis, and those findings have shown what we basically anecdotally had already known, which is that the most difficult homicides that we have to clear in Boston involve young minority males killed in gangs and drug-related homicides in disadvantaged Boston neighborhoods, which is Boston's hotspot neighborhoods, as we usually refer to them. Can you move on to the next slide? So as a response, we have a chart diagram here that will show you what we've accomplished to date from last October when we received the award through this September 30th. And so with that, we started meeting right away while the program grant was being set up. And we were refining the strategy. Early on, we had decided after a series of meetings to change the initial strategy for several different reasons. The initial strategy, we talked about a control group and a treatment group. And the treatment group would have been able to receive much more focused attention, more homicide detectives, different protocols and procedures, and the control group was going to be managed very similar to the way we've always managed homicide investigations for several reasons. Specifically, sort of the ramifications of how that would have played out in Boston had somebody's young child been murdered, and we were going to give them the control treatment, and then somebody else was murdered, and they got all the bells and whistles. It just would not have been a good start to a project, as you can imagine. So after some conversations and further thought, we had changed the model, and we had presented that to the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and we had agreed to a different strategy that Anthony had developed, which is what you'll see before you now. One of our other issues or challenges was to then articulate that new model as well as the strategy itself to a wide range of internal and external stakeholders, from patrol response to 4 different groups in forensics, external partners. And so we also had to come up with a communication strategy early on. I think the superintendent will talk a little bit more about that process, but it was a real proactive thought process where we had to come together and create this comprehensive communication strategy. Through that, we had come up with 3 different things that needed to then get kicked off on March 1st. The development of the business model, the research itself, which was the retrospective research that I just mentioned, and then a series of meetings with the people in the training academy as well as outside training consultants to talk about how to match what was coming out of the business model in terms of recommendations and strategies with the training needs that would be presented both internally and externally to the department. So the business model and the training piece needed to dovetail together and continues to need to dovetail together while in the background the research piece is taking place. And so we've accomplished all that you see before you in this program strategy piece, and I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent now to give you a little bit more details on other strategies and other things that took place during that time period.
So what we did, it was important to establish.
I'm sorry. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Okay.
Okay. So in the next portion here, we integrated the preliminary problem analysis by about gang-related homicides in the city, and we found that those are the most of the cases, homicide cases, that have not been solved in the city. So we established a group of about 16 officers and civilians in the department composed of patrol supervisors who respond to homicide scenes, detective supervisors who respond to homicide scenes, homicide detectives, homicide commanders, and even people from our crime lab and who handle quality assurance issues. And a lot of thought went into choosing these folks because we thought they were the best that we could find, and we wanted to make sure that pulling this group together would also achieve the respect of the patrol force and everyone else who would have to buy into this project. We put together a very spirited group who met bi-weekly. We had approximately 7 meetings, some which went from 2 to 4 hours. And there was some serious intensity in this group. And they discussed best practices to create standardization amongst all units involved in the homicide and consisted of internal and external best practices learning and literature reviews. To this date, the group has utilized data and undertook a critical examination of homicide unit operations. We found that while a lot of the things that we do in homicide were done on a regular basis, they were not standardized in any form. And this group facilitated some of the recommendations for standardization. Based on that, developed a series of management and procedural changes, such as recommendations were direction at crime scene, unity of command, crime scene integrity, designation of crime scene areas, consistent canvassing, ensuring that folks who canvass were aware of the information that they needed to elicit during the canvassing interview. We talked about inconsistent utilization of forensic group units and how we can maximize productivity by using units in a more standardized fashion. Another recommendation was lack of formal and frequent reviews for forensic and in-case management peer review. There was also discussion about inconsistent district detective assignment and assignment to homicide cases, and also the lack of standard and detailed documentation. Through this, we developed several forms which we'll be utilizing in the future to standardize the way things are done, and moving towards the development of best practices manual. And we will continue to meet to discuss and analyze ongoing research to agree on what is working and what is not working with the new standards, and to facilitate an ongoing rollout of training components, which will be provided to all BPD investigative stakeholders throughout the life of the program and ongoing. With this, we're not only going to train our investigators, but we intend to roll it out to the patrol force who respond to these scenes to make sure there's consistency among the entire group from the response to the homicide to the completion. We also utilize best practice interviews conducted with practitioners in 7 cities: Denver, Fort Worth, Houston, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, San Diego, and Tulsa. All cities were significantly above the average national clearance rate in 2010. We reviewed manuals and articles relative to best practices in the ACPO murder manual from the United Kingdom and guidance from our expert consultant as well. I mentioned that 2 of our deputies traveled to the UK to study recently, and we're utilizing that information to add to our best practices as well. Through the Smart Policing Initiative grant, the BPD hired 2 full-time employees, including an analyst who will work along with homicide investigators on each investigation, and a part-time intern to support all components of the project. Finally, we've also increased the size of our homicide unit from 8 homicide detectives throughout the city of Boston commitment for this initiative. It's important to note that prior to this, each homicide team was composed of 1 sergeant detective and 2 detectives. So with this initiative, we will now have 1 sergeant detective and 3 detectives assigned to the team. And now I'll pass this over to Maria.
The next section is on assessment. So if you could move the slide up to the assessment slide. And based on the strategies that Superintendent Holloway just outlined, that brought us to where we are right now, which is heading into an October 1st kickoff, which will be the phase 2 of our model. We will begin from that point. We will begin assessing how effective or even the efficacy of the new strategies that we'll begin employing on October 1st in terms of assessment. However, we've been, since the BPG received its award letter, we've been documenting our many setup and process steps, identifying gaps in our current homicide response, determining opportunities for improvement of our homicide response and investigations. We have done this through basically chronicling every small meeting, medium meeting, large medium, formal meetings with the homicide advisory group, external meetings, police commissioner briefings, and so forth. Everything that we've done, we have the agendas, the meeting minutes, the next steps. We have decision flow charts, outcome measurement strategies that have been identified and communicated to everybody involved. All the meetings we've had with our training academy. So all along we've been collecting data and assessing what we're doing, and everything new that we learn, we integrate and continue to move forward on. So we almost see it as it's an ongoing effort of assessment and learning, in that every meeting we have, we talk about what we learned and where we're going next. In terms of future assessment, as we move forward with kicking off all the strategies that we've come up with through this process, starting on October 1st, again, we will assess how folks in the districts, in the various specialized units, and then the 4 forensic group units that we have, take these strategies and then implement it. What they find easy to implement, what's more difficult to implement, how do we make corrections along the road to implement them in a much more smooth way, and so forth. We almost think about this, although to some extent, or to one extent, the police commissioner has made it very clear that the recommendations that are being brought forth and kicked off on October 1st are definite steps that have to be taken. We're using as an opportunity to encourage constant testing and practice of all these steps, so that we're collecting data very vigorously about what's working. At the end of that period of sort of implementation and assessment, we'll then be able to get a better look at what needs to be changed to strengthen the model as we move forward. And so with this, at the end of the 6 months, there'll be a more formalized process and impact evaluation that Anthony will be conducting. The process evaluation will document the key elements of the intervention and determine whether the intervention was implemented as planned. While the impact evaluation will use a quasi-experimental design to determine whether homicide clearance rates in Boston were positively impacted by the new protocols and policy changes that we implemented. Furthermore, the impact evaluation will also include a comparative study between Boston clearance trends and clearance trends in other cities. So there'll be a 3-part strategy at that point in time that will then be rolled out. I know there's probably a lot of questions. We tried to touch upon a lot of process details that we've gone through over the past year in a short period of time. So if anybody has any questions, please ask. Nope? Okay. One of the topics we didn't discuss is some of the challenges. I think initially, given that it was a homicide project, as we all know, there's a culture of organizational cultures around homicide investigations that we had to deconstruct, and people had to think about it as homicide investigations being the ownership of the full organization from patrol supervisor on. Also, the complexity of the organizational change process that had to take place. We keep talking about this almost as 3 trains that were leaving the station at the same time, that we had to make sure that those trains were staying on track and going in the right direction, and that the communication about what was going on each of those trains were being shared amongst the full group. We also, felt a little challenged with the aggressive timeline, given we had to kick it off on October 1st. Early on, we had the sensitivity of the idea that these are homicide cases, so maybe a treatment and control group wouldn't have been such a great idea. And we may also, at some point, run into other issues as we pick and choose things that we're going to move forward on. And the training logistics as well. We were not able to train everybody pre-October 1st, so we'll be rolling out training on an ongoing basis for these new protocols and policies. Other than those challenges, is there anything else you'd like to add? No? Okay. So thank you very much. And please ask questions if you have any.
Kyle, this is Mike White. I think Chip had to step out, so I can wrap up. If there are did anyone want to raise any final questions, either in the chat box or to ask them over the phone? Okay, what we'll do is use a couple of things to wrap up. You'll see in the chat box the information from the moderator. You should be getting an email that will have the link for the evaluation on the webinar. Please take the time to complete the evaluation. We take those comments very seriously. We're always looking for ways to improve the webinars and how they're presented. If you have any other questions, maybe if Vivian's still there, is there a way we can make the contact information for presenters available? We'll certainly look at the questions that were asked in the chat box, but we can also make those the contact information available. So if later today you have a question for Lowell, there's a way you can reach out to Arthur and Brenda, and we'll try to do that. Other than that,
yeah, we can definitely do that.
Okay, great. So Vivian will make that available. Other than that, I just wanted to say thank you for everyone taking the time to present and to listen. So thanks very much. And one final thought: just keep in mind there was one suggested reading today, which was an article by David Weisberg. What you heard today were essentially 4 case studies of the SARA model in action. That article by David Weisberg and his colleagues reviews the evidence base on the effectiveness of SARA more generally. So if you have interest, you can certainly go there for additional information on the research that's been conducted on SARA. So with that, thanks again for everyone participating, and take care, and remember to fill out that evaluation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.